The third crisis we face is one of moral vision. We sometimes think that we can cheat on this teaching and get away with it, right? Few, hopefully no one, but few would argue that adultery has no effect on a marriage. Well, it's not affecting my marriage. I think everyone nearly so would recognize this will destroy a friendship of marriage. But many think that contraception, well, might be wrong. It's got some problems with it. The church teaches, it's wrong, but it's not going to have an effect on my marriage. Well, this is a crisis of moral vision, because what I say yes and no to affects me. It forms my way of thinking, and this is very clear in the way we teach children. Right? The child comes in, slams the door, and throws the stuff on the table, and we say, excuse me, take your stuff, go back out, come back in, close the door where it's supposed to be closed, put your book bag where it's supposed to go. Why do we do this? Because our actions form our interior disposition. We form habits. And so this is true of contraception. If spouses make a habit of holding back on generosity and not giving all of themselves, this has an effect on their marriage. There's no doubt about it. How often have couples lost interest because intimacy was lost, or majesty had been evacuated, or even sacredness and respect were in question. This is especially true in my experience of wives who are sensitive to this. How many women barely tolerate the marital act just as a concession to their husbands because of loss of the majesty. The use of contraception will bring you quickly to this point. People find the teaching difficult because our society is sexually addicted, is just obsessed, and in the wrong way, of course. There are two fallacies you'll see by which you can recognize a worldly view of sex that has led away from respect, responsibility, and dignity, and has leaned into darkness and addiction. The first is, I think you find this practically in every argument, every sexual argument that challenges the church teaching on sex. First is that it's trivial, or at least sometimes. In other words, it's no big deal. Catholics have a hang-up. You're saying it's sacred. But the church, you're hung up. You have a problem with just being open about sex. Well, no, the church says it's not trivial. You are sacred. And how you use your body sexually is very significant. Permanent good or permanent harm can be done in this action. And if you do permanent harm instead of permanent good, that's gravely immoral. So this union is to be sacred because you have been made sacred by God. A temple of the Holy Spirit even. And we see all the time that loss of respect for life as sacred leads to violence in the home and in society. The second fallacy that you'll see very often is that sex is inevitable. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. You might as well give it now. You're going to fall. You can't avoid it. And this is a tragic falsehood, though. There is so much room for romance in a courtship that's chaste, and indeed romance is far richer and more honest when a true friendship is not replaced by lust. And unfortunately, in our society, really, courtship has been lost. Teach your children, teach your daughters especially, the gospel. And now, it's true. Once you become sexually addicted, you lose your freedom, and you need the help of others in order to stop acting out, as an alcoholic might. So, in that sense, right, people lose freedom. So to say, well, you can't avoid it. Well, some people cannot at this point in their life. That's true. But it is simply not true to say that you can't say no, that you cannot master this desire, that you cannot be responsibly in control of your life and of your desires. After all, sin did not conquer Jesus. Jesus conquered sin. And the Holy Spirit is powerful and rescues all who come to Him. So, for anyone who has an addiction, we should bring it to Jesus, who can heal and free us. We can be free. And desires are trained by patterns of repeated action, as we said in teaching our children. If you smoke every day for 5 years, you will likely have a strong desire to smoke on the first day of the 6th year. On the other hand, if you do not touch a cigarette for 5 years, it's not likely that on the first day of the 6th year, all of a sudden, you'll have this insatiable and irrepressible desire for smoking. Or if you haven't, same example, if you haven't stolen for 20 years, it's not like now you're ready. With every passing year, you have this pent-up desire to steal something. It becomes easier as you become more virtuous and do the right action. Now, the sexual appetite is like the others, except that it is naturally conjoined to personal intimacy. So, it's false to say that the longer one abstains from sex, the more one desires it. That's false. Now, it is true that if someone is starving for love, one might experience this in terms of growing frustration and sexual desire. Sure, that's right. But the deep need here is for affection, tension, friendship, right? And not necessarily sex. That's proven over and over again, because these bad unions do not produce joy and love and lasting relationships. It's not a shortcut to true love. It doesn't deliver what it promises. So in other words, abstinence should not be blamed either for suppressing sexual feelings or augmenting them in a dangerous way. Accompanied by an unhealthy psychology or theology, abstinence could entail some injurious suppression. That's true, but it need not. So Humanae Vitae is liberating because it affirms our dignity and our freedom. What husband and wife do is not trivial or inevitable, but is sacred and profound. And it can be freely entered into. Freely. The contraceptive mentality blunts generosity and manifests a distrust in God's providence. And so it injures the intimacy of marriage. God invites husband and wife to share in what is properly his own ministry. That is, to create new life where before there was nothing. God alone can do that, yet he gives, as Aquinas says in technical terms, the dignity of being a cause to his creatures. We share in something that belongs only to him. We have a dignity of being a real cause in the world. And in the sacrament of marriage, he elevates a natural friendship to the level of a sacrament, where husband and wife are to be instruments of salvation to each other. They are to be partners in leading each other to glory. That can be forgotten. It is forgotten. This is something that should be contemplated, recovered. That's what marriage is supposed to be. That's God's intention for it. So, I'm finishing a little early here. I must have talked fast. But we can pray that, may the Lord, in his great kindness, strengthen couples to embrace with joy the wondrous vocation he has given him, including and in which situated this brilliant teaching, brilliant and liberating teaching of Humanae Vitae. Thanks for your attention. Now you have half an hour instead of just 15 minutes for questions, which might be a good idea. Otherwise, you're going to just have to sit around and drink coffee and talk about the NCAA or something. So, any questions? Please.
I just have a question. When I get into discussions with people who really, really are against Humanae Vitae, out come the hard case stuff. So they'll say, okay, this was actually used for me about a man who they totally justified abandoning his wife because she was Catholic. She had a baby and almost died. The doctors told her, well, if you have another child, it'll kill you. And so she insisted on total abstinence. This is actually before the whole symptothermal method really came around. And her husband abandoned her. And they present this as, well, of course, and he was right to do it because she was so unreasonable. Whereas I'm like, you mean he just left her? And their child? But they're always, that's reasonable. But there's always, and it's like the abortion thing where people come in and it's, well, but what if she's going to die and this, that, and the other thing. What are good ways to talk to people about that?